Yep, believe it or not, that's me 5 or 6 years ago performing Hamlet in the park. And no, I wasn't Hamlet. Thank the gods. I'm not exactly what you'd call a Shakespeare nut. I'm certainly no English literature graduate either, just a casual fan of Shakespeare's plays and somebody who evidently doesn't mind embarrassing himself on stage from time to time. This is probably the target audience for this episode of Doctor Who I'll be reviewing today, riddled with references and hyper-emotive acting. Of course, I was only an 11-year-old twonky who knew next to nothing about Shakespeare when this episode came out, but it still stood out in my mind when considering what episodes to review from Series 3. Maybe there's something about Shakespeare that's eternal. The power of words is indeed a theme that resonates throughout the episode. Is this idea woven through a coherent narrative though? Or is the whole thing just a big selection of sexual innuendos? So without further ado, let's get on with the review. The episode begins with a bard singing a lovely song to a saucy young lady in a rather Romeo and Juliet balcony scene fashion. Well, except for the fact he gets invited inside for a bit of rumpy-pumpy.
Would you enter, bold sir?
Oh, I would.
Jesus Christ. Not even a minute in and I'm already wondering how this got past the executives. It's crude, but I don't really have much of a problem with it. It's funny the stuff you pick up on as an adult, because I sure as hell don't remember this episode being distractingly naughty when I was a kid. What I do have a problem with though is them killing this poor horny bugger for no bloody reason. The younger witch, Lilith, then has this big monologue staring straight into the camera. It's certainly unsettling and ties in with the numerous asides from Shakespeare's play. Doc and Marthe then arrive in London, 1599, where he gives her the good old time-travelling tour guide, which was rather amusing. Strangely, none of the townsfolk of this busy street bat a single eyelid at this police box that's just suddenly appeared in the middle of it. Considering they didn't really have police back then, they probably wouldn't have cared for what was written on it, but still, Doctor, your parking skills are terrible. They go to the Globe to see Love's Labour's Lost, and I quite like Martha being curious to the point of near embarrassment. Even suggesting they find the lost play and sell it in the present day. A nod to Back to the Future that the Doctor immediately writes off as a bad idea because we all know where that story ends, in disaster. The play ends and our protagonists go for a meet and greet at the local inn. Shakespeare experiences sexual harassment from a bartender and we see Lilith from earlier disguised as a maid. This was certainly rather odd considering not 2 minutes ago she was sitting in the box all dressed up like a queen. How did that happen, I ask? The answer? Witchcraft. I could argue about the nonsensical things the witches do in this episode, but we'd be here all day. The mere fact of them being witches acts as an excuse to explain away strange things that happen in this episode. In the opening scene, for example, the two witches appear as though they were there the whole time. The added bonus, though, is that they're alien witches, so you can get the Doctor rambling on about how they were around at the dawn of time to act as a pseudo-explanation for their showing up in 1599. My point is that there's artistic license for these seemingly inexplicable occurrences, so if I get too tied up in something absurd that takes place in this episode, I will do my utmost to stop myself before I get a bit embarrassed. I thought it was great that we didn't need a conversation explaining how Old English suddenly sounds like 21st century English in 1599. Instead of being written off as the TARDIS doing the translation, we see Martha attempting to speak it like a tourist with a phrase book, and the Doctor shoots her down in a similar fashion to when Rose tried to speak in a Scottish accent the year before. The Doctor then states he hates starting from scratch, which was top-notch. It works not only for him as a character, but also for the script writers who get the short straw of writing episode 2 with a new and unknown companion. Suddenly, a big guy called Mr. Linley walks into the room. He explains that all scripts need to go through him first, something I would assume Shakespeare would know already by this point, and then leaves. Even this seemingly insignificant character isn't exempt from a bit of sexual deviance.
I shall return later.
Ugh. I actually thought the drowning of Mr. Linley was quite something to watch, and even felt a little karmic. Though, I think they went a bit over the top by stabbing the heart and tearing the doll in two. If you wanted to get rid of him, why not just tear the doll and have done? Oh wait, they're witches. Never mind, have your bloody overly drawn out ritual, why don't you? I'm definitely all on board for the power of words vibe that's going on in this story, but some of these enchantments are practically nursery rhymes. I just wish there was some double toil and trouble vibes to them instead of some something a child could write. The separation of 21st century sensibilities and political correctness is something the episode tackles with what we'd call courage in 2019. Like the way Shakespeare calls Martha blackamoor, combined with his disbelief that she's a doctor. The way he's attracted to what was then considered the exotic woman, I doubt would have gotten past the BBC if this episode was produced today. Intriguingly, the pair don't retaliate in any way, for they just simply shrug it off as him not knowing any better, because even to them, Shakespeare himself is exotic. The most renowned English writer in history would have had attitudes totally dissimilar to our own, so it's easy to forgive his outdated attitudes towards women. All the sexual content peaks when the Doctor and Martha have to share a room. The scene itself isn't very long, but the Doctor's stubbornness and detachment works well for this scene and upcoming events. Martha gets her hopes up when they're inches away from each other, only for him to bring up his ex. For the whole time, she was probably treating this adventure like a date, maybe even the coolest date ever. Then, for the day to end like this would make any woman mad, especially with him calling her a novice and reminding her she's going back to her boring life tomorrow. This makes her blowing out the candle at the end of the scene super satisfying to watch. Lilith then takes control of Shakespeare again, however this time she completely possesses him to complete the play. This ties into the idea that Shakespeare wasn't truly the author of all those wonderful plays, and that the name was just a front for another unknown playwright. In an earlier scene also, Martha questions the appearance of Shakespeare compared to his portraits. Maybe this was more of a meta joke about the actors who play Shakespeare, but the ambiguity of his identity works well for the story, as it is something we just take for granted. It's a theory of extreme fascination, but far too complicated to go into in a Doctor Who video. Although, it would definitely make a cool video on its own. Sadly, this scene falls flat on its face when the barmaid comes upstairs to shank William's spear. Oh, yes! Lilith comes up with another nursery rhyme, causing the barmaid to die of fright. But she's a witch, Harry! She can do anything! Something I loved about this episode also was all the little references to Shakespeare's work that are sprinkled about this episode, and how they're tied up with causality. The Doctor essentially gives Shakespeare the "all the world's a stage" line, and Martha also claims Shakespeare wrote about witches. To be or not to be, the play's the thing, it's endless. This all attached nicely to Martha's questioning of the butterfly effect at the beginning, as though the Doctor and Martha are going to aid in Shakespeare's success. I also think filming within the new globe was a great idea. It really makes for an awesome shooting location, considering the time period of the episode was before the original globe burned down in 1613. Coincidentally, the man who instigated the reconstruction of the globe in 1997 was Zoe Wanamaker's father, who played Cassandra in the previous two series. The trio then go and visit Superhands in the loony bin.
My legs are gone, man. I'm a jelly. Paralyzed. It was fucking brilliant.
Turns out it wasn't just Shakespeare's hand that was puppeted, but even the design of the globe itself was not of feeble human hands. I love the conspiratorial nature of this story, presented through the cinematography also in this hideous close-up on his face. A witch then appears and the Doctor figures out they're Carrionites. These aliens channel energy with words. Well, isn't that convenient for them? They're witches, Harry! Come on! Suspend your disbelief for 5 bloody minutes, mate. The Doctor uses their same tactic to make her disappear. Martha screams to be let out, and it just dawned on me that the man the Doctor told off for whipping the patients in the hospital just locked them all in a cell and fucked off. How did they get out? Well, it wasn't witchcraft, I can tell you that. The next thing for the trio to do is stop the play. Will fails to do this, whilst Martha and the Doctor go to the address Superhands gave them before his untimely death. They find Lilith there, and all the praises go to Martha in this scene. She's so bravely naive, trying to pull the same stunt as the Doctor by naming the witch, but it backfires on her. The witch can't name the Doctor because even he's forgotten his own name. Him not being swayed by the witch's romantic charm was great too, tying back to the shared bedroom scene. Martha was this close to giving him CPR all over again.
Oh my god, Doctor! Don't worry, I've got you.
Jesus Christ!
But she gives him the Time Lord equivalent of restarting a heart instead, which was rather humorous. Then they arrive in the nick of time to stop the Carrionites from sending their sperm into the sky.
They come! They come!
The solution to solving this mass storm that's opened up in the globe is to freestyle it.
Close up this dinner, painful day of decay. Decomposition of your witch's plot. You feed my brains, consider me your toy. My doting doctor tells me I am not. Foul Carrionite, cease your show. between the points. 761390! 761390! Banish line! And Tinker's Cuss, I say to thee!
This is pretty creative and all, but the Carrionites could well have just pinged his head again and they would have won. The same goes for the Doctor. What happened to that doll they made up not 2 minutes before this scene? The dolls are conveniently forgotten about, which is a shame because they're one of the best parts of the episode. Instead, they get a rather traditional pantomime-esque, oh no, it's all over for us debacle, completely not in the spirit of Shakespeare whatsoever. Anyway, the deal gets sealed and all of history is restored because the stage door opened and the script for Love's Labour's 1 gets sucked into the void. To top it all off, we see the audience thinking it was part of the performance, history's first use of special effects. After all that fun and excitement, Shakespeare attempts to kiss Martha, which was a really great bit to end the episode with. All the sexual tension brought about by the Doctor's disinterest and Shakespeare's creepy/racist approaches culminate in this moment. The lack of dental hygiene in 1599 really instantiates how out of his league she is. This contrasted nicely with the never-ending praise Shakespeare receives in this episode. You also have this conflict between the reputation of the works and the authorship question. Even if he wasn't the true author, the works are historic. I mean, how many other writers from the 1500s get as many performances in the 21st century as he? All these queries and themes are halted, however, with an ending that is truly fantastic. Of course, it's ridiculous how unprotected she is, but her reaction to the Doctor was perfect. It causes the Doctor and Martha to run for their lives, ending the episode beautifully. And to think, right, that this moment wouldn't get any form of explanation until 6 years afterwards. How funny a thing like hindsight can be. So, did it suck? I wouldn't say this episode is quite as good as Smith & Jones, but it's certainly not bad either. Martha, after 2 episodes, has already become a really favourable companion. Her sexual interest in the Doctor played to the episode's strengths as well as its insistence on being sexual at every opportunity. This episode is coated with references that any Shakespeare fan would appreciate, with the power of words as a theme oozing from every corner of the story. I love the ending, the use of puppets, and its conspiratorial nature. Sadly, there are a few minor issues, like the opening scene, the nursery rhymes, and the rather bland antagonists pulling down any forms of tension that could have been achieved. There are a few technical mistakes as well, but I don't think this episode was particularly high on the budget list either, so it's somewhat forgivable in that regard. Overall, an enjoyable episode that stands the test of time. I give the Shakespeare Code a 7 out of 10. Thanks for watching. Look at all these ooh, somebody's here. Hello? Hello. Look at all these wonderful people that support the channel. They are my angels and are very eager for a Father's Day review, which is what they'll get if I get 50 patrons. They also get to see this video a day early, and the support acts as a life jacket for me in case of spontaneous, arbitrary demonetization. Thanks, YouTube. What did you think of this episode? Leave a comment below or join us on the Discord server, where we will continue this discussion. Oh!